You're listening to Catalyst for Change, and my name is Jessica Huckabee, your host. I started this podcast to learn what makes people resilient after challenging events and how they've used those series of events as a catalyst for change in their life. You'll hear stories of resiliency and strength, so get ready, sit back, and be prepared to be inspired. Today, my guest is Craig Inzana. He's a mental wellness advocate, a media creator, a mindfulness practitioner, and his perspective is to constantly seek and make healing modalities accessible to those that might otherwise be blocked off from them. He's a recovering addict, obsessed with self-development, well-being, and self-compassion. Craig owns a marketing agency that focuses on marketing and selling through relationships. He was previously a commissioned painter, a filmmaker, and generally a multi-disciplinary artist. His goal is to someday own land and form an intentional community based on the concept of universal compassion and intense belief in rehabilitation. Thank you, Craig, for coming on my show, Catalyst for Change, Stories of Resiliency. I really enjoyed learning more about your story. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about your background and what's been a catalyst for change in your life?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me and thank you for creating this space to have these sorts of discussions and tell these sorts of stories and share these tools that people can use to build out their toolbox so that they can be more resilient.
Yeah.
For me, um, it's kind of a winding path, and I'd love to say that there was, one very concrete moment that turned it all around. There were a couple that we can get into that I think were pretty pivotal kind of turning points in life, but I dealt with depression, anxiety, kind of pretty extreme, even suicidal thought patterns from a really early age. And that even became psychosis at certain points, my late teens and early 20s. And I started drinking and using drugs excessively to cope with that and
Okay.
kind of cope with all of the different existential crisis that comes along sometimes with trying to build your own worldview and that sort of thing. But then
Yeah.
you also have the actual history of mental illness in my family, and it's kind of this recurring thing. So that, just led into full blown addiction for years. And there was just a ton of suffering in that. And eventually I was able to turn around and be sober, get sober for about 3 years, but then I relapsed for a whole year.
Mhm.
And I think what I learned from that experience, and we can get into the little details of that along the way, but what I learned from that experience at a high level is that like white knuckling through trauma or some kind of thing that you're avoiding, like if you're in addiction, you're avoiding something. And when you get into recovery, if you don't address those things that you were running from in the first place,
Mhm.
eventually they're going to circle back around and catch up with you. So
Yeah.
that is really what happened. And I ended up racking up $30,000 in credit card debt
Wow.
and maxed out literally every possible avenue for money that I had. I had been running a business, which is now doing well and successful. But at the time, I was running that business into the ground. I wasn't making any money. So really, it just, because I did not address those underlying things, it just continued to sneak back up on me and become pretty disastrous, which are, somewhat I'm still paying for those things, literally in the credit card debt.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, how long
and
ago was this that you turned your life around for the last time? And you sound like you're doing good now.
yeah, so it was a year ago actually was when I
Okay.
recommitted to sobriety, and it's interesting because I can already within like a month or two I could tell the difference between that time and this time than the previous time where I'd been sober for 3 years, because there
Yeah.
was still a deep amount of suffering that was going on those 3 years, where now I've been applying different practices and applying different mindsets and relation to things that are kind of out of my control, like the fact that now I have $30,000 of which is now 19,000. So I've made a pretty significant dent in that in a year. But those things are things that I can't snap my finger and fix. I can't fix the world and all the things that cause me to suffer when I look around, cause me to feel sorry and empathy for people. And anything like that is outside of my control, I've learned to separate myself a little bit from the suffering that can come along with that through a bunch of different techniques.
Yeah.
But really, it was that debt that was the catalyst, if anything, for the change. So I'm almost grateful for that, because I went to file bankruptcy and found out that the house that I partially own, that is my grandma's house, and she still lives in that house, they would take that away if I filed bankruptcy and end up charging my grandma rent, which she couldn't afford. So then she'd have to move out and move to a home, which is why I took over the house originally, was so that she didn't have to move to a home.
Yeah.
So it really put me up against a wall, really my back to the wall. And it was like, okay, well, I got to figure this out from the philosophy standpoint, but also like, what actions do I have to take to start making progress here?
And to keep your grandmother at home where she wants to be, which
Yeah.
you did in the first place. That was a good deed that you did. Now, you mentioned mental health challenges running through the family. What was that,
Hmm.
the depression that you mentioned?
Yeah. So on both sides of my family, there's different chronic mental illness, and it's depression, bipolar disorder, mostly
Mm,
diagnosed on both sides. I've
goodness.
never been diagnosed, but
Yeah.
that's really just because I've avoided going to the doctor and therapist about it. I did a few years ago when things got really bad, but they still didn't really ever end up diagnosing me with anything other than anxiety. Interesting thing is I think beyond just like a DNA aspect of, a tendency towards alcoholism, for example. Almost
Hmm.
every man in my family has died from an alcohol related accident or disease. So I was like, I don't even know if there's other
Yeah.
things that I should worry about, or be considering, because alcohol is pretty much the thing that kills most men in my family.
So it's a good
And
thing you got sober, it sounds like.
yeah, yeah. And I actually did not drink a drop of alcohol until I was 18 years old. I
Okay.
took those warnings to heart, and I understood. And it was when I turned 18, I met a girl who was like, "Hey, come drink with me." And I kind of was feeling the depression, and the second I took my first drink, I knew, I was like, "This is great. This is amazing." I don't know why I was avoiding this all my life.
Yeah.
And I didn't really comprehend how much of a problem that feeling of escaping all of that sadness was and anxiety was going to be.
Yeah. So that sounds like once you took that first drink, that was it. And that led down that road of addiction. And you have gotten clean, it sounds like. For a year you've been clean. You were able
Hmm.
to use that, that huge, massive credit card debt to your advantage as a catalyst for your change. Because of that, you know that you have to stay sober. You know you have to keep focused on that business that's
Hmm.
now flourishing after you've given it more attention and you've been working at it. And you can keep your grandmother, who it sounds like is really important to you, in her own home and not have to go to a home, a state home, or an older person's home.
Yeah,
Yeah. So what are the tools you mentioned? You mentioned some tools that you learned along the way. Can you tell me more about those tools?
absolutely. I'd love to. So the the big tool is this idea that, and it shows up in different philosophies. The main way that I learned it was through Stoicism, and also the Dharma, which is inspired in the thing that's taught in Buddhism. It doesn't necessarily have to be a religious thing. There's like a philosophy there outside of the religious aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And that one of those core things is that, there are certain things that are under our influence and there are things that are not. And understanding and clearly seeing which things are under our influence and which things are not rids a massive amount of anxiety and suffering around all of the things that are around us. And it's
Yeah.
interesting because through the podcast that I do, I ask everybody, like, what is a tool or a technique that has helped them build a more fulfilling life?
Mm.
And a good, like, I don't know, 80% of them say that exact same thing in some different version of words.
Yeah.
Um, and because it's really powerful, and it's something that we're not really given that idea, most of us. If you
Yeah.
were by a parent or something, then you're really lucky. It's such a huge thing. Like, and it sounds so obvious when you say it. It's like, well, don't stress about things that you can't change.
Yeah. It sounds easier than it is.
It's so, yeah, exactly. And that's the funny thing about like the Dharma, for example, is like every piece of wisdom there from that ancient tradition sounds so simple and obvious when you hear it, And then when you
Yeah.
actually go to practice it, you realize, oh, wow, this is really complicated. And this is really has a lot of depth to it.
Yeah, because so many other factors come into play, like if you grew up in a religious background, what
Hmm.
the religious context was, or if you grew up in a culture of shame and blame or alcoholism, even
Yeah.
that has a lot of shame attached to it. How could you know what's in your control and what's not if you're constantly being shamed for things or blamed it's so tough living that way.
Well, it's an
Yeah.
interesting thing too, because that's a concept within AA also, which I
Hmm.
only actually attended a few times. It just really didn't, the
That's
format of it was
yeah.
too slow for me, and it just didn't, it resonates for some people and it doesn't for others. And I think it's important that we have other ways for people to, dedicate to sobriety. I go to a mindfulness based sobriety group, but one of the core pieces of AA is the serenity prayer, which is grant me the understanding of what is in my control and the ability to release the things that are outside of my control.
Yeah. And that's the religious context too. If you're, subscribed to any type of religion, they always talk about the serenity prayer. So it could be, found in the Buddhist philosophy
It's
or
everywhere.
everywhere,
It's
any
it's
religion.
definitely a foundational truth. The thing is every single human being, no matter what culture we come from, no matter what religious background, whatever experiences we've had, what time period we're alive in, we all have more or less the same mind. So we're all suffering in a lot of the same ways. The way that manifests looks drastically different across cultures and across time, but a lot of the core things that cause us to suffer are the same. So
Yeah.
you'll find a lot of that same wisdom all over the place, and it just really is a matter of finding something, a version of it that clicks for you, dedicating to it, not necessarily to the extent of shutting out everything else, but actually dedicating to practicing the things that you're learning rather than just intellectually understanding them.
Yeah. And so are these principles that you've learned from Dharma, the Buddhist philosophy and Stoicism, how are these helping you stay sober in your sober life?
Well, it has helped me move beyond just abstaining and understanding what it means to move beyond just abstaining from alcohol or drugs and to actually recovering the aspects of life that there is suffering emanating from. All of
Yeah.
us suffer in some way. And that for me personally was a lot of existential, like, what is my purpose? And am I helping enough people? And, am I doing enough good? And those sort of things. And I had a lot of guilt around that I wasn't living up to some potential. And the Dharma has helped me in a lot of ways just understand my own anxieties and the cravings for things to be different than they are
Mm.
and how that manifests. So, and I mean, it's, there's so many lists. If you
Yeah.
looked into the Dharma at all, you're like, there's the Eightfold Path, and then there's the five
Yep.
hindrances, and then there's the paramis, and there's just like all of these different, and they all have these, words that as Americans seem very foreign, which for some people is appealing. For me, it's honestly not. It's a little like I prefer to not call them by their Sanskrit names because it just gets too confusing. And
Yeah,
it
I
kind
agree.
of, yeah, and it's not helpful, I don't think, when you're having conversation.
Yeah,
But the
it
core
doesn't. Yeah.
concepts of them are still very useful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've actually looked into the Buddhist philosophy a bit, and it's very interesting. And yeah, a way that I wish I could live, but it isn't easy, right? It's not something that just comes naturally, especially in our culture. It's very
Hmm.
different than the maybe the Buddhist traditional culture that where Buddha originated from.
And so one thing that I initially, when I first kind of came in contact with the ideas of Buddhism, and I wouldn't call myself a Buddhist. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
sit here and say I'm an expert on Buddhism by any means. But when I first came in contact with it, I thought there was this aspect of, and there a little bit is, but I thought it was necessary for for the path of minimizing and relinquishing suffering. I thought that I had to give up everything. That's a common kind of misconception, because the
Mm.
monks more or less do that, and they're seeking this next level of quote unquote enlightenment. That there's a lot of stuff that is within like the Pali Canon and the original teachings of the Buddha that are actually meant for householders, is what he calls them, and they're people that are still participating in the world. You don't have to give everything up and go live in the forest to use
Yeah.
some of those principles. There's ways that you can use it. And honestly, like, it's kind of this funny catch 22 of, if you are giving everything up and to the expense of your responsibilities and that sort of thing, then you may be desiring and clinging to this idea that by doing that everything will be better. That in and of itself can be a source of suffering, because you're always going to be like, well, I
Yep.
need to give up more, I need to give up more.
Yeah. It's just that can create more anxiety and more suffering. And yeah, but just giving up on the things that you have no control over, not
Yeah,
getting attached to things, letting things move through you instead of, hitting you all of a sudden and knocking you over, but letting things, just slightly moving out of the way, like Aikido, like the
yeah.
art of Aikido,
And
which,
knowing that everything changes.
yeah,
So
everything
if
changes.
whatever's happening right now, whatever stress you're feeling, whatever anxiety you're feeling, if you, instead of trying to force it out or trying to solve it even, uh,
Mm,
allowing yourself to feel that, but also not attaching yourself to it, it
yeah.
changes. It goes
Yeah.
away eventually, and then something else will come up that you're anxious about.
Yep.
But as you practice that, as you practice non-attachment to it, then and anxiety is often from things that you can't control. If you could control it, then just take action. That's kind of
Yeah.
the question that I ask anytime I feel anxious. Can I control this? Yes or no? If it's
Yeah.
no, then let it go. If it is yes, then what can I do about it?
Yeah.
And then take that action.
Yeah. No, that's really good. And then that helps keep you on track for where you want to be in life, it sounds like. Now, are there any struggles that you still have staying sober, or, staying in the moment, or, not reverting to the way that you used to think about things?
I think that thankfully a lot of the kind of core things that used to bother me and used to haunt me don't appear as much in my life anymore, but there always seems to be new things that, you peel away a layer and there's another layer.
Yeah.
And for me, I guess the biggest thing is anxiety, and it has not gone away. Like, I still have a lot of anxiety. If I am not mindful and not practicing mindfulness, I will spiral out into these. I have to figure this out, and I have to figure this out. I have to figure this out. And the funny thing is I'm not actually doing anything. I'm just worrying. So I'm a chronic
Yeah.
worrier,
Yeah.
and whether that's the scale of like the world or within my own life, and it's just a matter of noticing when I do that and taking the concept of simply begin again and starting over and going, okay, I'm spiraling out again. That's fine. I do that. Let's start over. Let's go back to point A, which is, what could I actually be doing right now?
Yeah.
And it's still definitely a thing that does not go away. It's kind of like people think that through meditation practice they're going to stop having spiraling thoughts sometime, and it's like, no, even the most experienced meditators still experience that. It's just they're not attached to those thoughts, or at
Yeah.
least they try not to be, and
They
they have a
move
little more
through them.
practice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there certain times of the day where you do like a clearing of your, heaviness that has accumulated through the day, or the anxieties that you felt? Is there any practice that you have, or do you do that as they come up?
It's a little of both. I practice in the morning, I meditate, and I do some gratitude journaling and kind of try to just, as part of the meditation, it's the body scan and just like letting go of some of the tension. And then the same thing in the evening is I try to take, I really try to, I sometimes don't succeed in doing this, but I try to take a few hours after getting off my phone and my computer to just relax.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's journaling. A lot of times that's journaling, but even not journaling, just being, and not necessarily meditating, but just trying to like breathe and calm down and relax and appreciate maybe some of the things that are good. And but definitely another piece of that is just throughout the day noticing when there's a lot of tension building up and being able to step back and take a couple breaths. And I know it sounds so cliche and everyone says it, but taking a few breaths, it's amazing how much better that'll make you feel.
Oh, that's good. Do you have a community around you as you've been learning all these new tools?
Thankfully, I think that's a piece that I was missing before when I was had the 3 years of sobriety, but it was always kind of a thin ice, where
Yeah.
I was still spending a lot of time with people that were active addicts.
Mm.
And, I still have a ton of love for those people, but I accept and realize now that that can't be, I can be around those people. That just can't be my only community. And now I live in a new city and there's a Dharma group here. So they meet every Tuesday and Thursday, and we just sit down and we talk about the Dharma for an hour. So I've met a lot of really wonderful people through there, and there's a bit of a community. And then
Nice.
also there's just a lot of people that I've met that are um, sober, which is
Mm.
helpful outside of AA again. And having just that kind of informal group of people, that tribe around you is incredibly helpful, because I don't think anyone can really do anything, live a fulfilling life on their own. We're social creatures. So it's important that we notice and pay attention to who we have around us.
And it's so important the people that you surround yourself with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm amazed that you are able to still have relationships with people that are addicted, because for many
Mm.
people, they have to totally hit reset on their whole social circles. So that's amazing that you're still able to, have somewhat of a tie and still stay sober. So that's hats off to you, because that's really tough for a lot of people.
Yeah. I think it's important it's the same with, a relationship, because it's really a relationship to these substances. It's
Yeah.
what you kind of need a clean break for a period of time. And I think a healthy relationship that ends, eventually you should be able to talk again and be friends. To try, it's unrealistic to think, because you literally, like with relationships, you literally have a chemical dependency on this other person in your mind and in your brain.
Yeah.
So thinking that, oh, we can just, change that relationship. So the same with a community of addicts. It's like, to think I can just all of a sudden just stop being an addict when my identity in this group is as an addict. My stories that I tell myself, all my habits around how I relate to these people is all using, a nearly impossible task. I
Yeah.
mean, it's if I literally don't know anyone who's been able to do that. But then once you've been sober for a little bit and feel you have a good relationship to it, slowly reintroducing back to that group, or a new group of people that may have some people in it that are addicts. I wouldn't say I don't go to just like ragers and, and parties
Yeah.
anymore,
Yeah.
but I
No,
do go
but
to bars sometimes, like a music
yeah.
show, or
Yeah.
we'll have little get-togethers, and some people will be drinking and maybe go a little too far, and used to really bother me to be around, and it was really triggering. But
Yeah.
now I just kind of accept that that's their own journey, and I have built such an identity now as someone who doesn't drink and someone who doesn't use drugs, mostly because it's not helpful. It doesn't help me live the kind of life that I want to live. It doesn't help me have the kind of mind and relationship to people that I want to have. So
Yeah.
anytime I feel any amount of temptation, which I still do, anytime I feel any amount of temptation to drink, for example, I just walk through that scenario. It's like I'm craving relaxation, or inhibition, or something, whatever that is, to escape some amount of suffering or something. And if I walk through what would that look like if I did have a drink, or 12.
Yeah. Walking
um,
through that is, yeah.
yeah, and it's almost, and it's like, oh yeah, no, that's actually not ever, that's not going to help in any
Yep.
at all. So
Yeah.
that
No,
allows me to be around people that are still active users.
that's good. And I think to me personally, I think there's a difference between if it's like, if you have been a user of, illegal drugs versus alcohol, because alcohol is so embedded in our culture and our history and our identity as a nation, it feels like. So
Yeah, I was
yeah,
both. So
yeah,
when I was originally, I was using some pretty hard drugs, and they were much easier to quit. Physically, maybe not, but it was actually easier to stop doing that because it was easier to escape those circles.
Yeah.
Drinking was by far the hardest thing to quit because, especially when I was like 23 years old, what a 23 how do 23-year-olds
Yep.
socialize when you don't
Mm-hmm.
drink? Like it's just not possible.
It's
And
everywhere. Yeah.
exactly, and it's not only like even at my job, like it would be encouraged that like at our events everyone would be drinking, and like there were just so many environments where I'd just be around it constantly. And because I was just kind of white knuckling trying to not drink, it was just constantly a temptation that was difficult to be around. And everybody was constantly inching me towards that. And whether they were aware that I was sober and kind of not respecting that, I definitely had a lot of people around me that were just kind of waiting constantly for me to start drinking again, and kind of were just
Yeah.
like, well, this won't last forever, which is
Oh,
really honestly not cool
yeah,
at all.
that's not cool. Yeah.
But that's how they, dealt with all their problems, and that's how they had fun. It's the only way they knew how to have fun. And they were like, how could you possibly having fun if you're not drinking? Which
Yep.
is like, you totally can have plenty of fun without drinking.
And it's so
Uh,
hard when when all the concerts and, your
everything,
friends are yeah, it's everywhere. It's
networking.
networking. There's drinks involved. Yeah. Oh,
And it's
goodness.
weird. People look at you like there's something wrong with you if you say that, oh, I don't drink.
They think, oh, well, you're missing out, or there's all these conceptions around that, misconceptions around not drinking. So that's good. You know what to do. You could walk yourself through the scenario. Well, what happened if I took this drink? What am I feeling? I want to relax. I want to escape. I want to let down my guard, or, whatever it is you may be
Yeah.
thinking with that alcohol. You're able to walk yourself through that. And that's a really powerful tool. And that's one that I think a lot of people don't know about. So I appreciate you sharing that. Now, is there anything that you want to tell people that are, just trying to get sober? They're thinking about it for the first time. Is there anything that you would have told yourself when you were just starting that journey?
I think the two things are that it can get better, and life is still enjoyable, if not more enjoyable, sober. I actually have a lot of friends close to me that have now gotten sober after spending time with me, realizing that like, oh, he's actually much more fulfilled and like happier. And I want to be like that too. And clearly drinking is not helping me. And it's a long process for that to happen. But, and then to find people wherever you are, whether you have to go to AA just to meet some people, or, commit to it, whatever that looks like for you, finding other people that are sober because they will understand. And people that are not and have not, even tried are not
Yeah.
going to understand. And that's just a hard fact that, if you're spending all day at a bar, of course, everyone at the bar is going to tell you there's no problem.
Yeah, of
They're all
course.
alcoholics too.
Yeah.
And it's so hard because I know that they're your friends and you love them. And just because you stop spending all your time in those circles does not mean you have to abandon those people. I think that's an important aspect as well.
And that's really good. Get yourself together, get it, make sure that you get sober, you're over that hurdle, and then go back to those friendships if you have to. That's what it takes. Taking time away is
Hmm.
what you got to do. Well, thank you. And it sounds like you're paying it forward just by being an example to other people that may want to get sober, or just by watching you and, the things that you're doing in your life, the energy that you have, and the outlook has really helped some people. Is there anything else that you're doing to pay it forward right now?
Yeah, I'm also, I tried to take that and scale it a little bit. My business and my career has been content creation. So I started a podcast that was specifically about, how do we live more fulfilling and connected lives? And so not only am I sharing my own story and sharing my own relationship to these things and the tools and ideas that I find along the way, I'm also interviewing other people that are doing the same. It's been amazing because literally people have reached out and said, "Hey, this episode, I was suicidal, and this episode like helped me get help for the first time ever." Or, these episodes here inspired me to try to get sober for the first time ever. Like that is, even if it was one person, but it's not, it's been quite a few actually. And it
Yeah.
continues to happen. It's pretty incredible. And I always was so concerned about what kind of impact I was going to make on the world, and that I wasn't living up to that. And the funny thing is that now I'm like one person by one person genuinely actually helping people. And there's like literally nothing more fulfilling than that.
Yeah, it makes you feel good at the end of the day, and you know that you're doing something to help the greater good, humanity, even just one person, because one life can change other lives. It sounds
Absolutely.
like. Well, wonderful. One more question I wanted to ask you: what daily practice do you have, like either at the beginning or at the end of each day, to keep you in the right mindset?
For me, absolutely the most impactful practice has been gratitude journaling.
Mm.
So at the end of every day, I ask two questions. I ask, was I the person I wanted to be today? That's a pretty important one. And then I ask, what am I grateful for? And
Okay.
usually I write until my hand cramps up.
That's good. You have a lot of good stuff to be grateful for. And the person that you wanted, so was I the person I wanted to be today? That's a good
Mm-hmm.
one. I'm going to have
Yeah.
to write that one down. That's a really good tip. Well, thank you so much, and for talking to me about your journey and sharing your tools. I've learned a lot from you today, and I'm sure the listeners will as well. Now, I will make sure to put all of your information on your social media, your podcast, on my show notes. Is there anything else that you think we may not have covered today?
I think we covered a lot of really great ground today. And I appreciate you for, again, creating the space and the time to do this.
Well, thank you, Craig, and I hope you have a great day.
You too.
You've been listening to Catalyst for Change, and my name is Jessica Huckabee, your host. Join us next week for another story of resiliency. And please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and feel free to leave me a comment or email me at catalystforchange20@gmail.com, or on Facebook, we have a page at Catalyst for Change Resiliency.